a production of South Carolina ETV.
Funding for this program is provided in part by the MacArthur Foundation and the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics.
Many educators have recognized the need for new ways to assess students' learning. The National Council of Teachers of Mathematics has developed this video and the associated materials to explore the use of alternative assessment approaches. This video is divided into segments which contain both dramatizations and panelists' reactions. My name is Terry Hughes, a teacher educator, and I will serve as moderator for the panel. My colleagues are Shirley Fry, past president of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, Harold Asturias, mathematics teacher in grades K through 6, and Marty Gale, mathematics teaching consultant. The dramatizations, the panelists' remarks, and the viewer's guide are catalysts for your discussion. Write down your thoughts and questions for each segment as you view it. In discussing alternative assessment, you will develop your own action plan for implementation. As with any significant change of instructional practice, changing the strategies used to assess learning is complex and requires careful deliberation. In the video dramatizations, we'll watch the efforts of 3 teachers implementing new methods with their students. George Stone is a devoted classroom teacher who is as steeped in tradition as the flag and apple pie. His classroom is like many we see in schools today. Jennifer McCormick teaches first grade. Young, enthusiastic, and straight out of teacher education, she is finally living her childhood dream of teaching. Nancy Fulton is open to new ideas and willing to take risks. She often says that her 11 years of teaching have taught her more about adolescence than most psychologists know. You'll also meet a school administrator, Paloma Rosario, and Vaso Armanakis, who teaches language arts.
Miss Fulton, how come I got a D on your test?
I've already told you, LaVon, you missed 9. And when you miss that many, you get a D.
I know, but it's not fair. I know how to find the surface area of those cubes, and I can get the volume of a cylinder. I did that just fine in class when I had plenty of time, and I could use my calculator.
That's right, you did. So why couldn't you do that on the test?
Well, like, I made some dumb mistakes, you know, like not adding right. Tests make me real nervous. Cause, when I don't get good grades, Grandma takes after me big time.
She does not. I know your grandmother.
But Miss Fulton, she won't let me watch TV.
You're really lucky to have somebody that cares about your grades, and you. I'll see what I can do.
Does that mean you'll change my grade?
I can't do that, but I'll see about getting you credit for what you know and for what you can do.
That's cool, Miss Fulton. Thanks.
Bye, LaVon.
Bye.
Hi, Nancy. How's it going?
I don't know.
Adolescent hormones raging?
As usual. And, well, I'm concerned about my test.
Well, this committee is the right place to be. What happened?
Today, LaVon, I think you taught him, George.
LaVon Hopkins? Tough grandma?
Neat woman. Anyway, he made a D on a test. Said he didn't have enough time and he wanted to use a calculator.
I'll bet he did.
No, he really works hard and he understands a lot. He just makes lots of random mistakes on tests.
So, a perfect time to try alternative assessments.
Uh-huh. You're welcome to all that extra paperwork. I've already got more than a battalion clerk.
No, sir. If I have to do any more paperwork, I'll quit and open my bakery. Here, try these.
Mmm.
Yeah, I'd love to quit too. Marry a beautiful, mature woman. Move to Belize, raise mangoes.
Oh, come on, guys. Teaching's my dream job.
Well, most of the time I guess it's mine too. But I don't know, after this assessment committee gets through with us.
Yeah. I hear alternative assessments means giving kids credit for different answers or for having part of the answer. In my math class, there are only two answers. The right one and the wrong one.
World's changing, George. You might even have to give up that slide rule.
Never.
Wasn't that all too familiar? We've all had students just like Levon. What is it that we might do when we're faced with that kind of challenge with a student?
Our need for different views of how students learn and how to monitor their progress, I believe, demands that we find different ways of assessing students' learning.
For me, alternative assessments mean a broader picture of what a student can do, what his mathematical power is. I appreciate the chance to look at what he knows and what he can do instead of what we traditionally have done and looked at what they don't know.
I think that also alternative assessment allows us to give the message to the student that we're assessing what we value their thinking, that we value their processes, and that's what we're doing with, or we're trying to do, implementing alternative assessments.
And also recognizing, I think, that students have different perspectives on problems and have different anxieties. Notice in that, Levon's anxiety with testing caused him to perform in quite a different way than he would in a natural setting.
What do you think about the calculator? I know there are Mr. Stones out there who are really concerned, and quite legitimately, about when it is appropriate and when it's not appropriate for a student to have access to a calculator.
I think the word appropriate is the key word there. When is it appropriate to use one? I mean, which would adult among us would go to an accountant who didn't know the correct use or the appropriate use of a calculator? It's for problem solving. It's to be used as a tool, not a substitute for skills.
Even more than that is, if the teacher had been utilizing the calculator or any other technology with the students, or the students had been using that in their learning of the content and in their application, then that testing situation needs to match the instructional and the learning situation.
Another aspect of alternative assessment is its relationship to real life. And in real life, we utilize all the available resources. A calculator is one more resource that should be available to students so that they can demonstrate what they can apply, what their understandings are and how they apply it.
Which means that in any given task, a child should have at his disposal whatever manipulatives would be appropriate. Blocks, patterns, rulers, compasses, anything that they can get their hands on.
If we go back to the meaning of alternative assessment, we agree that it's going to be a set of diverse activities to see how students think and where they are in their own understanding of the concepts.
Which brings in a communication factor that we have heretofore ignored in mathematics.
Yes, and I think one of the things that the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics is really concerned about and continually sends us the message is the need for alignment. Assessment should be aligned with the curriculum, and the strategies we use to assess student learning should match the way we teach them. And so in this particular situation, if Mrs. Fulton was going to be using a calculator when Levon was learning about solid shapes and how to find their areas and surface area and volume, then it seems like that was not the time she was trying to assess whether or not Levon could do calculations. And so instructional method, curriculum, and assessment need to be aligned.
And then he should have had that calculator on his exam.
Exactly.
The teacher, Miss Fulton, knew that Levon could do the problem. And so she needs to trust her judgment. I think teachers, all of us, have to be more confident in using our judgment as part of the assessment process and include that in the total picture of how students are learning.
I think the word you use, trust, is important also, and we need to trust students to be a good judge of themselves, to look at us and say, I trust that that student has given me a clear picture, and I know he can do this, and he's told me that, but I've missed it somehow.
Isn't that what Levon's problem was? He knew he could, but he didn't exhibit it for the teacher on that one particular tool.
And her dilemma is that she knows that.
That's right. But also what we saw was that teacher and others coming together in a committee, forming a committee together to talk about these issues that need to be addressed, but not alone, but rather in a support system, in a committee group, which they will, I'm sure they will develop together these new alternative assessments.
We ask for the collaborative effort from students. We need to model that with our own networking of teachers.
Notice that the student work then is the basis of that discussion. It doesn't come from some command from the principal or mandate from the state or whatever, although those things do happen. But the teachers are in the dilemma of how to be really fair about assessing students' progress.
When we talk about the alternative methods, I think about the different learning styles and modalities, and allowing a child who was maybe very kinesthetic to get up and perform or present, or to build something in 3 dimensions, and to allow us to understand his mathematical power that way.
Professional development is truly important, and in this little dialogue among the 3 teachers, I think they're going to bring different attitudes to the committee. Obviously, George Stone had one that we were able to identify with very quickly. But the 3 teachers probably will, in a support way, modify their own thinking.
One of the things I thought about when George said, "Oh no, it's right or wrong, this is how it has to be," is that at least he's on the committee. He's listening, and he is going to, you know, sort of watch. He may not buy in right away, but he's listening and he's talking. And that's an open-mindedness I'd like to see.
Yes, and I would say that one of the things that is important is for beginning teachers as well as experienced teachers to get together and reflect on their practices and the experiences they have in classrooms so that they can decide what kind of action plan they want to implement in terms of improving and changing assessment practices.
Come on, you guys, stop arguing. We can use both sides. You don't need to be in that radius.
Hi, how's it going?
Oh, hi, Mr. Stone. How you doing?
We're doing a math survey
Our buildings around the school.
within a 1-kilometer radius.
A math survey?
Yeah, we're going to classify the buildings and figure out what percentage they are, like the people live in them or the stores.
Even what kind of businesses.
Sounds great.
Yeah, and we analyze our data.
See?
But right now we can't figure out if all these buildings are inside our radius line or just the ones on the right.
Good question.
Oh, come on, Mr. Stone. You can tell us.
We'll figure it out, and when we finish, we'll have a great survey.
Yeah, Miss Fulton's a cool teacher. We get to do lots of neat stuff, like this.
But we have to think a lot harder, though.
Yeah, LeBon, we can see how hard you strained your brain.
Well, I have to run. I have a meeting with Miss Fulton on Monday. I'll tell her I saw you.
Tell her we're working hard.
Sure thing.
Later, Mr. Stone.
Bye.
Wow, did you see those flowers? Who do you think they're for?
Nancy, you'll be pleased to hear I spotted 3 of your recruits Saturday on Orchard Road, reconnoitering for your survey.
You did? Well, very good. I really had no idea how they'd do. I was afraid I'd see them on the nightly news or something.
Hi, George.
Jennifer?
Nancy, are you trying performance tasks?
Mm-hmm.
Terrific. I'd just love to have mine do that. But how do you keep up with what they're all doing?
Well, they broke it into segments, and then they keep a log about each part.
Oh, I see.
I like this a lot better because it's 2-way communication, not me handing down wisdom engraved in stone.
Well, I don't know how I'd implement a new MO like yours in the 5th grade. I mean, I can't turn them loose in the neighborhood.
No.
But you could design an age-appropriate task.
You know, the group I saw was working fairly well together. Of course, Kelly and Levon were picking at each other.
There's no love lost between those 2. But students do have to learn to work together. And they have to think.
Yeah, Levon complained about that.
It's the 1K syndrome.
As in computer memory?
They need to upgrade their math code processors.
Well, while we wait for the rest of the committee, I'm going to finish my lesson plan for next week, when the students decide how to present their data. Great. Okay, today we're going to continue working on data you collected on your surveys. I want you to think of some ways you can communicate what you found. Now, each group should decide the best way to convey your information to someone else, and be prepared to tell me why you chose that method.
Miss Fulton, one graph or whatever per person or per group?
One per group. And it doesn't have to be a graph. It can be a model, a picture, or a diagram, or you might want to write a report or a description in sentences. Any other questions? Okay, get with it.
I'm experienced. I know this kind of stuff. Pie chart will work. See, people will be able to see it easy. It works, I know. Let's see what you got.
How's it going over here?
Pretty good.
We thought we'd build a model with cubes. Red cubes will be stores, blue for homes, yellow for offices.
We'll stack the cubes to show how high they are.
Don't interrupt me, Levon. We'll also be able to show where they are.
That's an interesting idea. What are some other possibilities you've thought about?
A pie chart.
I'm not quite sure how we do that.
Well, do you remember when we worked on the circle graphs?
Yeah, and the whole circle, or pi, is worth 100%.
Oh, that's right. So we could just figure out what percentage each group of buildings is.
Couldn't we use fractions too? The total number of buildings we found would be the bottom number.
You have lots of good ideas. Talk about it and then decide what you want to do.
Let's use the pie chart. It'll work. All you gotta do, I've already added it out.
That was a wonderful example of an activity which allows students to think, work together, and communicate their ideas. But aside from that, is it authentic? And how do we decide that?
I guess it more or less depends on what authentic means to people. For me, authentic means that you're bridging the gap between what students learn in school, or school mathematics, and the mathematics used in real life. And here students were actually going out into the community and using information that was available to, so I would say it was authentic.
I particularly liked the role of the teacher, more as a facilitator, a questioner, a prober, so that the students could make those decisions and communicate them to one another. Multiple representations of ideas is something we'd like to encourage in our students, and her questions allowed them the freedom to make that decision.
The other thing that was so clear and special about this performance task that the students were working on was that it was the perfect opportunity not only for cooperative learning, because the students were helping and sharing ideas with one another, but there was an authenticity lent by the fact that the teacher didn't say this is going to be a lesson on graphing or this is going to be a lesson on percentage. The students were left the task or the challenge of figuring out what mathematics they needed to think about in order to solve this real-life situation.
And yet there was something, the idea of the teachable moment, for those skills that turn up in the discussion that children may be insecure with, and that teachable moment meaning that the teacher could pull them aside and do a lesson on whatever needed to be done so the students could then continue their investigation.
And you just mentioned it, but it was a performance task. They were doing, they were showing, applying what they know, and showing their understanding. That's what performance task is all about.
The teacher had available for them all the resources. Did you notice the computer in the background that was generating the graph, and they had the cubes and other materials that would allow them to use whatever they wanted in the task to show their results.
I like the aspect also of the collaborative working atmosphere, and yet we know that there are complaints often from groups where the students say, well, he wasn't pulling his weight. Yet this gives the opportunity of a group product, a group performance, as well as an individual assessment. The students will perform their own activity as well as the final group product.
also I think depends on the teacher's goal in assessing. What is it that the teacher wants to assess? We usually have to have that clear in our minds in order to know if we're assessing the group as a group or the individual members of that group.
Did you notice how she had a log to keep track of that? Yes. And stressed the fact that it was a communication between the students and between the teacher and the student as well. So the log gave an opportunity for the teacher to assess how the students were working, progressing, and thinking about the problem.
I also noticed that this was not a testing situation. The assessment was built in. The decision-making about where students were going and what they were doing was built into the activity itself, and she could question them and get information about what their thinking processes were as part of the curriculum, as part of the instruction.
Someone once said that the assessment is invisible, then you truly have it embedded in the instruction and the curriculum.
I think that also it's important to point out that the teacher, I assume that the teacher, that the one that we looked at, has been making assessment informally all along. It's an ongoing process. We certainly do that all year long, I think.
Yeah, I've always been suspicious of the occasions when I've been standing in front of a classroom teaching them and asking questions and one or two people respond, or I get a whole group recitation. And here the teacher has a chance to see the written student log entry and respond to it, and then the walking around and engaging the students in conversation where the teacher can actually ask individual students questions really gives her an opportunity to monitor each child and each group's work, which I think is a real useful teaching and assessment tool, so that it isn't like, I think performance tasks can be frightening because you think, I'm going to give them this big task, and how will I know what they're doing as they go along the way?
That's important. Ongoing informal assessment is taking place all during the activity and as the students are producing the product or the final stage of the project.
I like the aspect of accessibility and equity in the task. Students at any level could have gotten into the task and chosen whatever means they felt were appropriate to display their information, so that you give every student the opportunity to be engaged in the task.
And certainly this was an engaging task. You saw the students really interested in trying to accomplish what the goal of the task was. I think that that's really important when we design that kind of performance tasks.
Can we think of another example of a performance task? I think that's one of the toughest things to do.
It comes to mind an activity where students have been put into groups and designated as environmental engineering firms, and their task was to create a park for a small community, and they had a budget to deal with, and they had they could make 3D models, they could do scale drawings, they had to do a presentation to the council, the city council, to get the contract to build the park. And it was a wonderful and engaging activity, and students went wild with it. Designs were beautiful.
We need to remind teachers that sometimes the students will give us the ideas about the appropriate tasks or tasks in which they're interested and would be willing to spend their time and persevere to find solutions.
I think that one of the special things that we can learn as we work with performance tasks is that as you experiment and start to take risks with students by giving them a performance task and watch how they work with it, your confidence suddenly gets up, as theirs does too, and then you can experiment with more and more challenging tasks. When we work with them, we usually are surprised that the students can do a lot more mathematics than we would think that they could do.
Okay, boys and girls, time's up. Let's talk about your answers. Heather?
Mr. Stone, I don't get it. Yesterday I found this great shortcut, but I can't get it to work today.
Yeah, Heather, you're so smart.
Okay, Ben, that's enough. Heather, come up and show us.
See, I took the numbers on the bottom and switched them up in the top, so it should be 7/12. But that's not what it has in the book.
Uh-huh. I see what you did.
The bell's gonna ring, Mr. Stone.
I'm aware of that, Keon. We'll continue working with fractions tomorrow, boys and girls. Good work today. Heather, I'll talk to you tomorrow about your shortcut. I think I can help you see why it doesn't always work.
Okay, see ya.
Bye. Hola, Paloma.
Buenos dias. How's it going?
Oh, okay, I guess.
Well, how's the assessment committee?
They're doing some really revolutionary things.
What?
Well, this one woman just turned her kids loose on a big project, a survey, and she let them decide how to do it.
We'll be using similar methods here soon. We need new ways to assess students' knowledge of mathematical processes.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess you're right, but I'm babbling, aren't I? But I'm beginning to believe that I may have to try something new.
Wow, Mr. Stone, what happened?
Well, Heather, one of my best students, I thought she understood exactly what we were doing. But when she showed us a shortcut on the board, I could see she just didn't have a clue about the process.
Mm-hmm.
I was amazed that I had missed that. Do you have any suggestions?
Well, you could try a writing assignment. You could have them write to you explaining how to do the process. You'll see if there are others who don't understand. Oops, I've got a parents' conference in 5 minutes. Gotta run.
Writing? I can't imagine Keon writing 2 words about mathematics, much less a detailed explanation.
Well, they might surprise you, George. In language arts, mine write about everything. Of course, they resist. They act like I'm tying them to their desks for an hour of public radio. But you can learn more about a student's thinking process from a piece of writing than anything else.
My little ones love making up stories.
Well, most kids do, once we free them of our expectations and rules.
But how am I going to grade a math essay?
Remember that holistic scoring scale we saw in the committee?
That's what I use. Well, good luck, George.
Thanks. I can't wait to run a writing assignment up the flagpole. Okay, boys and girls. Yesterday we worked on fractions. Today we're going to do something different than usual. Now, you know that Ben is absent today? We're going to write him a letter about everything he needs to remember when adding fractions.
You mean we gotta write a letter?
Oh, Mr. Stone.
A whole letter? Do what?
I don't know a whole lot of math stuff.
We've never had to write a math before. I don't get it.
Settle down, please. All I'm asking you to do is to write a few lines explaining what you do and how you think.
I'd rather do worksheets. What do you say we're supposed to do?
Okay. I expect each of you to have something written in the next 10 minutes. When you've completed your letters, divide up into groups of 4 and read each other's papers. Then pick the paper that your group thinks would be the easiest for Ben to follow. Yes, John?
May I sharpen my pencil?
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe we gotta write a letter in math class.
He's nuts.
Okay, boys and girls, you've had some time to read all the letters your group wrote to Ben. Now, I'd like someone from each group to read the one you think we should send to Ben. Who wants to read first? Okay, I'll draft somebody. Maria.
I don't want anybody to hear mine. It's stupid.
There's no such thing as stupid in this class, Letitia. You should be proud the other students chose your paper. Is it okay if Maria reads it, or would you prefer to read it yourself?
No, she can read it.
Okay. Go ahead, Maria.
Dear Ben, today we added fractions, like 1/4 plus 2/3 equals. First you find the denominator. 12 works because 4 times 3 is 12. Then you change the fractions. 1/4 equals 3/12, and 2/3 equals 8/12. Then you add the numerators. Then you add the numerators. 3/12 plus 8/12 equals 11/12. Some kids had trouble. Have fun, Letitia.
Thank you, Maria. Now, why did your group choose Letitia's paper?
Well, I like the way she started off by giving an example problem, so you can follow what she was talking about.
Maria?
Well, mine was sort of confusing. Like, if you had to follow my directions, you'd never come up with an answer. But Letitia, she said what to do and in what order.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
Yeah, like, one of the first things to worry about is whether the denominator is the same or not. And Letitia, she started with that.
Writing is an effective technique for students to use to communicate their ideas to us, their teachers, and to their peers, and also do some self-evaluation of their thinking.
That's right. We ask them to write a lot to us, or to a peer, or to an uncle to explain what they're thinking. But we need to remember that communication also means there are other ways, like drawing a picture, making a chart, or a graph. But in that sense, we can also ask them to write about an open-ended question, and they have the ability to express themselves of what they're thinking while solving a problem.
One element of open-ended questions that I particularly like is that there's equal access for all students. I visited a classroom where students were able to do a presentation and to do writing in their primary language, and they were not in any way denied access to the problem or to the thinking processes.
I like also about open-ended questions, I like that they has multiple answers or multiple ways to get to the answer that also allow that access that we're talking about.
That range of responses,
Yes.
as well as strategies that could be used by individual students.
Mr. Stone really managed that classroom quite well for someone who was trying his first
Yes.
writing task. To actually have the students share their writing with one another provided an excellent opportunity for them to do some self-evaluation, some peer evaluation, to model for one another. You know, the students were pretty astute in picking up on what was a good way of expressing the ideas and which papers had some pieces missing, which I think is an important part of that, which can control the amount of paperwork a teacher has to do.
And talking about self-evaluation, Maria said, my paper, if you follow my paper, you will not get anywhere. I think that's very important.
She recognized the
Yes,
difficulties.
exactly.
But remember at the beginning in that dramatization, the teacher was really concerned about how he was going to grade and do
Yes.
all of the paperwork.
I think that one solution to that is utilizing a holistic scoring method, looking at the whole composition and the whole writing instead of little pieces.
The idea of developing a rubric, which is a standard that the work can be judged against, rather than judging or assessing students against one another, comes in here. It's interesting to draw that comparison to the development of the discipline standard at the beginning of a school year, where the teacher has specific rules but asks the children to cooperate and to collaborate in developing the rest of the rules for discipline, whereas the same sort of procedure could be used in developing a rubric so that the students feel ownership in what is being assessed.
So when Mr. Stone was talking to the students about why they chose that paper as the one that gave the clearest directions, they might have been identifying characteristics or traits that needed to be included in a rubric.
Exactly.
It's a very good strategy.
And the students feel a part of having judged themselves that way. And they can feel good about then revisiting that information. Possibly Keon would have gone back and rewritten his letter based on the organization skills he heard someone else describe.
This means that students are giving models as well as the teacher providing a model for the students to follow. And certainly the involvement of the students in the sharing of their work would spark new ideas in the minds of the students. Remember, they thought writing was only to be done in language arts, not in math.
Right. Yes.
And so they would then have a better feeling about writing in different ways or presenting or acting out.
It was important, I think, also that he gave them a prompt. He set up an audience for them. And students liked that prompt because then they can extend it in any way they need to go.
One more thing that I like about what you said is that they have ownership. If they help to develop that rubric, then they have ownership of the process. And that allows them to come back to it and either change it or develop it even further later on during the year, making the rubric a dynamic thing, not a static, non-changeable.
Having
scale.
having taught language arts before teaching math, I think about the concept of a first draft and getting all that help from peers and from the teacher on the first draft and writing and rewriting, and then finally polishing it and then turning it in for an evaluation or assessment. And yet, in mathematics, we do this right or wrong, as Mr. Stone says earlier, and then we turn it in, and whatever it is over. And I think we need to remember that students should have a right to remember the concept of walking out of a room and going, oh, I should have said, or then I should have said, or why didn't I write? I think students come to that conclusion also, and this gives them an opportunity to go back and revise their thinking.
That reminds us that these things take time, that students need to be aware that problem-solving writing isn't and those things are not accomplished in very short periods of time. It might take a week to do this, and talking about it with their classmates would help, and having the peer evaluation to improve the paper or the product.
Also, we need to emphasize that we as teachers need to model that for them.
Yes.
If we ask them to write, then we need to model writing as they are doing it.
It's very different than the 2-word problems at the end of the 2-page spread that we see in every textbook. Well, this is not really writing, it's just a little computation on the end. This is a more thought-provoking and involving kind of process.
It involves posing problems as well as solving problems.
And then the sequential thinking through and communicating with those answers.
We can probably start to think of a whole range of communication tasks that students might want to do with and deal with as they go into these open-ended activities and challenges in their classrooms. And writing might cover both the attitudinal things that the National Council of Teachers of Math emphasizes in their standards. So the challenge really becomes for us as teachers to really think about what kinds of interesting communication tasks can I present to my students, and what can I learn about what they know as a result of having them complete these tasks.
This is cool, Miss McCormick. I'm gonna get 3 pencils and a brontosaurus with my $1.
I'm gonna get more than you because I'm gonna get 10 pencils.
Margot, what are you going to buy with your $1?
Nothing.
Nothing?
I only want one thing.
What's that?
A sticker book.
Oh! Well, can you buy one for $1? What can you buy for $1?
I could buy some dinosaurs, but I don't want them. And I got all the pencils I need. Can I go to the bathroom?
Yes, Sefka. Well, how much does a sticker book cost?
$8. You don't have $8, Margot.
Quiet, Joseph. Margot, how could you get $8?
I could, I guess I could ask people if they'd give them to me.
I'm not giving her my $1.
You don't have to, Gaston.
Miss McCormick, Steve hit Billy with the bubble one.
Steve, sit down. I'll talk to you in a minute. Okay, where were we? Something about $8. Getting $8 from people.
See my puzzle, Miss McCormick?
Okay, Joseph, just a minute. We'll talk about that problem later, okay?
Okay, Miss McCormick.
Paloma, boy, am I glad to see you. Help.
What, Jennifer?
Well, these alternative assessments. I wanted to assess group work with some individuals. And I had my classroom map and my checklist.
Do you have them with you?
So I finished with the other groups, and I was trying to work with Margot. You know, the shy one? But then the others were up and down, interrupting, talking, and then Steve hit Billy with a bubble wand.
Sounds like a typical day in the life of the first grade. But there are some things you can do. Now let's look at your map and checklist. You are observing 6 items for each group?
Yes.
And 3 per child?
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like a lot at once.
Mm-hmm. Well, you got bogged down and the other kids got bored.
So, what's the solution?
Jennifer, what do you think?
Well, I could observe fewer things and keep the others busy with a more interesting task.
Like Nancy Fulton's community survey.
Well, one that's appropriate for the little ones. I should have thought of that.
Well, now you have.
George, this just came for you.
Jennifer, you're doing just fine. Now let me know how those interviews go next week.
Thanks.
Well, Mr. Stone?
Should we congratulate you on something?
Now today, Margot, you and Melanie are going to swap coins. And there are lots of ways you can do this.
Okay.
Let's start with you, Melanie. As you're deciding what to give Margot, I want you to tell me what you're thinking. Think out loud.
All right.
Margot, can you give Melanie a quarter? And Melanie, I want you to give Margot the same amount of money and other coins.
So I give her like dimes and nickels or pennies and stuff?
That's right. Can you show me one way of doing it by using these?
$10, $20, $21, $22, $23, $24, $25.
Thank you. Now, Margot, I want you to give Melanie 15 cents.
I find it interesting that Jennifer asks her students to think out loud. It's often the case that students are not comfortable writing, or maybe it isn't developmentally appropriate to ask them to write their thinking processes on paper. So interviewing and conferencing gives the teacher a chance to see or hear what that student is thinking.
One of the challenges in using those strategies in working with children is to make sure that you ask the right question.
Yes.
Now, when she gave the children the task that they count money out to one another, it gave some authenticity to the task because they were counting money to give to one another.
Mm-hmm.
And she was able to really see, without being directive, give them dimes, give them nickels. She let them see that there was the equivalence relationship between the coins.
It was interesting to me to see the little girl looking up to her teacher,
Yes.
looking for validation. We do that as adults. We look for validation. But we need to remember that what we want as teachers to give to our students is that they move away from that validation to self-reliance. I think that's important an important point to make.
I noticed also the tape recorder in the foreground of that scene, and I think that's a lovely way to keep a record of what that conference had in it. And indeed, if the student is not a primary English speaker, that would be a way for that interview to have a record in the primary language and then be transferred later into
There are many teachers today who also use videotape to keep a record, because as the teacher is asking questions or setting the stage for the demonstration, the teacher could very well miss some important responses from the students. And so in viewing the tape later on, the teacher is able to really focus in on how the student responded, what the student was doing, and would get a different perspective on the way the students were reacting.
All these examples that we're citing are also examples of how assessment is aligned with the curriculum, how we can make that happen, that alignment happen.
Notice that the task was quite focused on the students making exchanges and representing the amounts in different ways. And it seems that the teacher really designed the assessment to be part of that instructional process.
In performance tests and open-ended questions as well, we can do that when we allow students to get up and do presentations. And we have them present, again, to an audience of some sort, whether it be their peers or some fictional group, and we let them get up and do oral presentations.
It was also very good in conducting any kind of observation or an interview with the child, that the teacher be focused. There may be lots of things that that occur that you get insights into the child's understandings. But when you enter the task and when you pose the questions, I think that I've always found it useful to really focus, have that all generated around a single idea or concept or understanding that I'm really interested in knowing whether or not the child has a command of.
We need to be very cautious as we begin something new, that we don't try to do everything in the first steps. And in that little exchange in the faculty room, she actually discovered herself that she had expected too much of her interview, of her record keeping.
I like the modeling of the administrator to let her answer her own questions, to be the facilitator as opposed to the imparter of all knowledge once again. And that modeling technique, I think, would help Jennifer when she goes back to her classroom to conduct her interviews.
One more thing that we can get from these kind of interviews is the message to the student that we value their thinking, and as well as another way to allow them to reveal that thinking to us.
Notice that those answers and those demonstrations can serve many purposes. Feedback for the instruction, what are the next steps in the following lesson, or perhaps identifying error patterns that the students have made, finding out how the students are going to approach the problems. Responses really serve so many different purposes for the teacher.
And I saw the ability for her to let those students extend the question, even beyond what her focus of assessment was. And if she were to say to them, can you think of another way to do exactly the same thing, and allow that student then to exercise even further thinking processes. Mathematically powerful first graders.
The little child who didn't want to spend money, who wanted perhaps to save it for something else, was initially a surprise to the teacher. But if she hadn't been so diverted by the other activities, she might have built on that and allowed the student to be creative in extending the problem.
Yes. Also, by questioning, by using the right technique of questioning, we can help the student reflect on what their thinking is, reflect on what their understanding is. If you ask them, well, how do you know that that works? Can you give me another example? Can you explain to someone else what you're thinking? That helps them, again, reflect on what their thinking is.
I also find asking students questions at the beginning of an interview may not really register. And yet if I pose the same question later in the interview, or possibly in slightly different words, the student has an immediate response, and it clicks in a different way. And so we must remember sometimes to repeat questions when the child is ready to hear them.
Yes, I think that one of the things that has the greatest value in looking at these kinds of experiences, we can see that even a first grade child can answer an open-ended question if it is pointed and focused on particular learning goals that were part of the instructional process. And perhaps, as you mentioned, Harold, the strongest and most beneficial outcome of that is that we are modeling good reflection for the child. I think those children are going to, in second grade, be much more critical of their own learning if they've had opportunities to have the teacher interact in those kinds of ways.
And it's important for the teacher to be focused on what the goal of the assessment is, so that they can develop the questions necessary in those interviews to allow the student to reveal their understandings of the mathematical concepts that they're studying.
And assessment isn't always something new and different. It can very well be a part of what the teacher is currently doing, but viewed in an assessment perspective.
Now, for the past 4 weeks, you've been keeping all your homework and classwork in a file folder. We call it a working portfolio because it has samples of your work in it. Today, you're going to select samples of your work for what is called an assessment portfolio.
What does that mean, Mr. Stone?
I'm explaining that now, John. In the assessment portfolio, I can see how much you've learned over time and how you've improved. I want you to choose several samples of your best work from the last month. Pieces that you think show what you've learned. Take them out of your work portfolios and put them in the assessment folders. These are the assessment folders. I'm going to hand them out when I finish giving you directions. Be sure to include samples of your work that we did on geometry, finding patterns, percentages, and multiplying mixed numbers. The other thing you need in your assessment folder is something to explain what you chose and why.
Here he goes again. You mean a letter? How long does it have to be?
It has to be long enough for me to understand why the pieces you've chosen show what you've learned. But it doesn't have to be a letter. It might be a table of contents with your comments, or a paragraph telling me why the pieces you've chosen show what you've learned and belong in your assessment portfolio.
God, Mr. Stone, I've never done so much writing in math class.
Now, John, we've been doing writing for several months now, and you've done well with most of it. Are there any other questions? You can work in groups on this. Talk about the choices you're making and why. I'll come around and talk with you individually, too, so you can ask me questions as we work. Ben? Maria? Do you know what to do in this group?
I don't have anything good. I mean, I don't like to see this crummy stuff.
Well, let's see. I remember you wrote some good problems on the World Trade Center. Or this one from the geometry quiz. You might want to use it.
No, because I had these wrong at first. I went back and changed the answers. See? You can tell where I wrote the new answers.
That's right. But remember, if you put this in your assessment portfolio, it's like showing me your second draft, like in language arts class. You write something and then you revise it. This revision shows what you've learned.
Oh, I forgot about that.
That's one reason we're doing portfolios, so you can show me what you've learned that you didn't know at first.
Cool. So, I can do that on any of these I want to put in here? I can change the answers?
That's right. And then write me something telling me what you did and why you chose those pieces.
Okay. Come here, Mr. Stone.
What is it, Letitia?
I don't know what to put, Mr. Stone.
Have you talked about it with your group?
Well, you're loaded down.
I need a Sherpa for this load of portfolios.
You know, I never thought I'd see Mr. Stone schlepping portfolios.
Even an old sergeant can change his stripes.
Well, good for you. I've been using portfolios for a couple of years for language arts with my 6th graders, and they love it.
Listen to this. Dear Mr. Stone, it was hard to pick pieces out to put in my assessment portfolio. I know you said we could correct mistakes on papers to show we had learned how to do this stuff, but that would be a lot of work for me. I was making a lot of mistakes at first. I decided to pick only the ones I had good scores on. You know what? I ended up having one paper from each thing we studied, except that stuff about subtracting mixed numbers. I guess I did learn some math this month.
That's great. You know, I found my students start to own and value writing more when they see that their ideas and feelings are valuable to me.
Portfolios are so different from the old way of grading, like we were graded. Boy, I still remember in 6th grade, Miss Perkins in that thin, high-pitched whine saying, "Honey, you missed these 5."
Oh, I remember that too well. Right. I've done it myself. But now we can let students correct their own work.
Mine seemed relieved when I reminded them that they could go back and change mistakes to show what they've learned.
That's great. I'm proud of what you're doing, George. Let's make portfolios available for parents on Visitors' Day.
Sure.
See you later.
What are you doing about paper? I mean, with all the writing we generate in my room, it's like we're deforesting the Amazon.
We're not using any more paper than before. I have mine choose material from their work portfolios to put into an assessment portfolio. That's what I look at.
So, do you use holistic grading?
Uh-huh. I'm looking at how they think. Or if they're thinking.
Yeah.
And I can judge whether the activities are effective. In other words, whether my teaching is working.
Oh, that's a tough one to look at.
Sure, but we're asking the kids to examine their learning processes. So why shouldn't we do the same?
Well, introspection doesn't come easily. I mean, that's something we all have to practice.
That's the truth. But portfolios are a good opportunity for me and my students to do that.
Right. And we encourage students by the questions we ask and by modeling.
You know, I was thinking, I might just keep a portfolio myself to see how I'm changing as a teacher. I could show that to Rosario to let her see how I'm doing.
George, you have come a long way.
Wow, Mr. Stone has really changed a lot. Not only has he been exploring all of these alternative assessment strategies, or at least selecting a few, but he's been able to find his own way to think about a management plan so that he could make sense of what he was learning about students through these assessment strategies.
What we saw him doing, of course, was to work with the portfolio concept. The idea of portfolios is to give a broader picture, a window of a student's growth over time, which we can view holistically, as it was mentioned in the tape. There are many different kinds of portfolios, however. We heard him mention a working portfolio where the students were just collecting all the work that they had. There are other forms of portfolios, such as unit portfolios, which is a collection of a segment of work or a unit that keeps all of those, maybe with a table of contents. Also, we talk about the assessment portfolio, as Mr. Stone did, where we talk about certain items selected, maybe the student selections and the teacher selections.
We have to remember, though, that a portfolio is not just a collection of stuff.
Right.
The portfolio has a design and has a purpose. And we certainly don't want to communicate a message that a portfolio is always a file folder. It could be a place, it could be a shelf, it could be a video, it could be a scrapbook, it could be a collection that students would put together in different ways.
And Shirley, you mentioned about the purpose of the portfolio. And in the video, they said, let's have portfolios available for parent conferences. Well, in the school where I work, we have implemented portfolios, but we have had the students help the teacher in creating the purpose. And one of the purposes that they have created has been to present it during parent conferences, which has allowed also our students who are of limited English proficiency to explain to their parents what they have learned throughout the year. And that makes the parent not only an observer, not only a receiver of the information, but rather an integral part of that assessment process, where the student explains what's in the portfolio to the parent. I think that that's a wonderful use for it.
I like also the idea, again, about the revisiting of assignments or projects, and then the ability to revise them, such as Kian explained when he said, I corrected all these answers, which is a wonderful concept. There are no artists that I know of, or architects, or plumbers who would leave their job in their first draft or unfinished form. And I think it's wonderful that those students were allowed to go back and change, or to fix, to revisit and revise into the second draft or even third draft, maybe, so that their learning, they did a reflection of their own learning. They saw where the errors might have been and corrected them, and saw their own math power growing.
The portfolio serves as a wonderful way for the teacher, for us, if you will, to go back and take a look at the development of the content, the students' thinking, the kind of learning that has taken place, the connections that have been made among the skills and the applications, and to help in the design then of the next steps. So the portfolios revisited allow for this revision or this renewing of the program.
That's right. And also, the portfolios allow the student to have that process of growth over time reflected by, as you were saying, including first draft or corrections.
Yes.
You can, if you don't have those in the portfolio, it's very hard for us as teachers to observe that growth.
One of the things that becomes important in staff development meetings, I think, should be extended and modeled for students as well, and that is the debriefing or the processing of information, and that reflection, that cover sheet that Mr. Stone was asking them to write. Why did you pick this? What did you learn from this assignment or this task? Would be a wonderful way of the child debriefing or processing the information so that he indeed does see what took place, what learning happened.
It truly is a way to give students power. We talk about student empowerment, teacher empowerment. The student is very much in control within the framework set by the teacher or the teacher along with the students. It's quite important then for the students to say, this is what I've learned and this is how I approach the problem. And notice that some students even say, I wrote problems, I posed a problem.
And that not only allowed the student to make decisions, but also improved his own self-esteem, which is a wonderful benefit.
And create the ownership.
That's right.
This is my portfolio. Then the question is, does the student get to keep this portfolio? Is it his, or does it stay with the classroom teacher or follow him along? It's a wonderful dilemma that the student and the teacher can discuss together.
And it's an interesting question because we don't know if my idea of a good portfolio is the next teacher's idea of a good portfolio. It's very hard to think in terms of what makes a good portfolio.
Because there is no recipe or formula or check sheet.
We have to be fair with the students and tell them if the student is to show the portfolio to the next teacher or if it's just a portfolio to share with parents, with colleagues in the classroom. And so this planning that we talked about earlier is vital in making the use of portfolios successful, not only through instruction but assessment as well.
Once again, I think cooperative learning was an important part of the way Stone was using the portfolio as well, because he put the students in groups. And that was an excellent opportunity for the students to sit there and look at one another's work. So much better than saying, well, I got a 45, what did you get on that test?
Did you notice he had the furniture changed in his room
in
this
yes.
particular dramatization?
He was into it. He had his sleeves rolled up and everything.
And yes, right. And now that he has those students evaluating themselves and thinking about one another, he actually has the courage to go on and think about the portfolio as a basis for his reflection about his own work as a teacher. And that might be something that we want to do, as we might just start building a portfolio of how we assess learning, and just to get a snapshot of how we may change over time as we experiment and explore alternative assessments.
Well, it's our last meeting. Do you think we're ready for summer and can put this away?
Yes and no. We need to work on PR.
PR?
I'm afraid so. I just came from a meeting with some of the parents, and they're concerned about the changes they see.
We're all going to have problems if parents don't understand what we can accomplish with these changes in assessment methods.
I have a great idea. Maybe we can get on TV or a breakfast radio show.
Whoa, Jennifer.
I think our best route is through the Math Teachers Association.
Right. They can help us with things like speeches to business and industry, civic clubs, the community.
You'd be good at that, George.
Thank you, my dear. But I'm going to be busy this summer.
Oh, are you taking courses?
No, I'm getting married.
Oh, that's great.
Congratulations, George.
The rose. It was from your fiancée.
You have a good memory. Yes, she's the one.
So, are you moving to Belize to grow mangoes?
No. I renewed my contract again for next year. This year has been an interesting one, alternative assessments and all.
Our committee made quite a team. I hope we get to work together some more. I feel like I have so much to learn about assessments.
I feel the same way.
Amen. We've got a lot to do, but these alternative methods are something I really see as useful.
I really like the way these examples have helped us to see how alternative assessment support the 4 process standards that are outlined in the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics Curriculum and Evaluation Standards book, which are problem solving, reasoning, communications, and connections. And it's really important that we work collaboratively in developing these alternative assessment tools in order to continue supporting those standards.
It's also amazing as you think about the scenes we've seen that occurred over the course of the school year, that the skepticism of those teachers has blossomed into a real confidence and a willingness to try new things. I guess the one thing I worry about, and I think we all have to be sensitive to, is that we have to help parents and community members also deal with those same kind of skeptical feelings.
Oh yes, those skeptics are out there in all of the other groups as well. Notice in that last segment they acknowledge the fact that parents would need to be brought along. Sure. And so our challenge is to help parents see through the student work how valuable these changes are. We not only have to communicate with our parents, but school administrators, school boards. We have to make certain that teacher education programs change. We have to talk to our legislators where mandates come for assessment. And so the whole idea of change needs to be thought of as a complete system. I think now the current word is systemic change. Yes. We can't expect as educators, as teachers, to make changes in our programs without having these other groups supporting us and encouraging our efforts.
And we need to remember that transition, change for all of us, is difficult. And it would be smart, I think, to take baby steps, not to try to do every alternative assessment technique at once, but to select those that are most comfortable for you and your setting, and to be patient with them. Students, as we saw from Mr. Stone's classroom, do not automatically take to writing, but as the time goes on, they become more and more proficient at it and enjoy it more because it gives them a chance to say what they really think or feel and get information back about that. So I think when we think of transitions and changes, patience has got to be a key word.
We also need reassurance that it's not
Yes.
much more paperwork, for example. It's probably the same amount of paperwork in a different way. We're utilizing it better, probably.
I was just going to say, in terms of utilizing it better, we're thinking of student work. Student work is always a wonderful selling point. I know, again, in staff development situations, to have teachers bring with them designated items that they can use or view for holistic scoring sessions, or to learn from the student work how to make judgments, where to go with this assessment, what are we looking for, how to focus those questions.
We have many of those student work examples in the resources provided to teachers. For example, that booklet on alternative assessment depicts student work. And as teachers begin to plan what they want to do, sharing, as we saw in this clip, student work in the faculty room, as teachers begin their planning and really looking carefully at what the student work means will help teachers grow in these aspects.
You also mentioned the faculty room, and I was thinking about networking with other teachers and how important it is to have a buddy or to take time to sit and talk to one another and to share the experiences and to help each other in that way. It helps us all from the sense of professional growth and that transition for our own learning.
Oh, that's important. The professional growth comes from these sharing opportunities. And so many people think, well, I can't really grow professionally unless I can go to a meeting or attend a class or go to a national conference or a state meeting. Those things are valuable, as are professional journals and resources. But the support system within your own teaching community is probably the most valuable to maintain the changes that are being made.
And I think we saw that in the dramatizations, where I think the most valuable moment for those teachers was when they got together right before the committee meeting. It was not necessarily the meeting with the committee, but rather that exchange of ideas just before the committee meeting would start.
You know, as we think about all of the things we've discussed in our conversations today, it is really a challenge for all of us to think about where are we and where are we going. And I would expect that everyone who has been viewing these segments and talking about them and thinking about what has been going on, all of those teachers out there probably have more questions than they have answers right now. And I guess I feel pretty confident that that's where we need to be, because just as we want students through alternative assessments to develop the skill to reflect and self-assess and think about new approaches and strategies and become powerful mathematically, we want the teachers to have the same experience in their professional life. And so it's time to continually work on those questions and pose them, but be patient with yourself if it takes a long, long time to get the answers.